Sometimes a story doesn't begin with a crime. It begins with a gesture that was never meant to be noticed. In the winter of 2022, while cataloging unprocessed material from a regional estate clearance, archival image analyst Miles Harper receives a single-mounted photograph sealed in brittle paper. The label is minimal, written in fading iron gall ink, North Creek, New York. 1872, no names. No studio mark. No accompanying documents. Just a family portrait, formal, symmetrical, composed with the rigid confidence of Victorian respectability. A father seated at the center, spine straight, beard trimmed with care. A mother beside him, posture controlled to the point of restraint. 3 children arranged with mathematical precision. Everything about the image suggests order, stability, intention. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment where you're watching from. At first glance, the photograph offers nothing unusual. It conforms perfectly to the visual grammar of post-Civil War domestic portraiture, neutral backdrop, restrained expressions, clothing chosen not for comfort but for what it communicates to the future. Prosperity without indulgence. Discipline without affection. It is the kind of image designed to outlive its subjects, a declaration that this family belonged to history's acceptable side. Miles has seen thousands like it. But archival work is not about what announces itself. It is about what resists being seen. When Miles scans the image at high resolution, intending only to log it before storage, something interrupts his routine. Not a face. Not an object. A hand. The eldest daughter, standing just behind her seated parents, holds her right hand at an angle that does not align with any known studio posing conventions of the 1870s. Her fingers are neither relaxed nor decoratively arranged. They are tense. Purposeful. The thumb drawn inward, 2 fingers extended, the others rigidly bent. It is not expressive in the theatrical sense, nor accidental in the photographic sense. It is sustained tension, maintained across a long exposure that would have punished even the slightest involuntary movement. Miles enlarges the image further. Grain blooms across the scan. Fabric textures sharpen. The hand does not blur. That alone is enough to trouble him. Early photography demanded stillness bordering on discomfort. Subjects were braced, clamped, instructed to suppress movement. Any gesture captured clearly had to be deliberate. The daughter's hand could not be an error. It required intent and resolve. He checks for damage to the negative. None. He checks for retouching. None. He overlays reference images of period hand poses used by studios in upstate New York. None match. The more Miles studies the image, the more the rest of the composition begins to shift. The father's jaw is clenched too tightly for neutrality. The mother's hands are folded, but not resting, locked. The younger children lean subtly away from their sister, as if distance itself were instruction. And the eldest daughter's face, so composed at first glance, reveals something colder under magnification. Not fear. Not defiance. Control. Whatever that gesture signifies, it was chosen. And whatever it points toward, it is not meant for the people in the room. It is meant for someone else. Someone later. Someone who knows how to look. Miles logs the photograph as anomalous and sets it aside, not yet understanding that he has just encountered a message that waited a century and a half to be read. Miles does not trust solitary interpretations. By training, anomalies require witnesses, not agreement, but friction. Within 48 hours, the photograph is forwarded to Emily Rose, a visual culture historian whose work focuses on industrial-era imagery and the unspoken languages embedded in it. She studies it in silence for nearly an hour before speaking. "This isn't a family portrait," she says finally. "It's a negotiation." Emily situates the image precisely where it belongs, the northeastern United States in the early 1870s, a period defined less by reunion than by reorganization. The Civil War had ended, but its economic aftershocks were still being absorbed. Textile mills expanded aggressively along rivers and rail lines. Entire towns reorganized themselves around factory schedules. And families, particularly those near industrial sites, lived under quiet, persistent pressure to supply labor, whether acknowledged or not. In this world, adolescence was not a protected stage of life. It was a resource. Emily points out details Miles had registered but not yet contextualized. The eldest daughter's dress is plainer than her siblings', cut for durability rather than display. Her sleeves are reinforced at the elbows. The bodice is altered, stitched down and reworked, a sign of reuse. Her shoes, barely visible, show uneven wear, heavier at the toe. None of these details are unusual alone. Together, they suggest routine physical strain. Then there is the mother. Her posture is upright to the point of rigidity, shoulders squared, chin held as if instructed not to tremble. Victorian portraits often demanded composure, but this is something else, containment. Emily notes the absence of any softening gesture, no hand on a child's shoulder, no shared line of sight. She is present, but sealed. The father's expression offers no contradiction. His gaze is direct, but disengaged. He is performing authority rather than inhabiting it. Emily's first hypothesis is cautious, built on precedent rather than sensation. During the mid-19th century, informal hand signals circulated among industrial workers, particularly among women and children employed in textile mills. These gestures were not standardized languages, but situational codes, warnings, acknowledgments, markers of surveillance. They existed precisely because speech was risky. Overseers listened. Walls carried sound. Emily retrieves inspection reports from Massachusetts and New York archives, marginal notes written by reformers who suspected abuses they could not legally prove. Several mention silent signs used by young workers to communicate injury, coercion, or imminent danger without drawing attention. The gestures varied by region. Some were improvised. All were designed to disappear into plain sight. When Emily overlays sketches from those reports onto the photograph, the resemblance is not perfect, but it is close enough to disturb. The daughter's hand does not express distress in a dramatic sense. It marks status. It indicates condition. In danger, Emily says. Or close to it. If that hypothesis is correct, then the photograph ceases to be commemorative. It becomes defensive. A controlled environment, studio lighting, rigid poses, used not to celebrate unity, but to smuggle information forward under the guise of normalcy. The family's location reinforces this unease. North Creek, New York, sat near water routes feeding regional mills. Census data from the period shows rapid population turnover, seasonal labor, and unusually high numbers of teenage girls listed under ambiguous domestic classifications. Officially, they were helpers. In practice, many moved between households and factories, their labor absorbed into the machinery of expansion. Emily emphasizes restraint. A hypothesis is not a conclusion. But the photograph, she insists, is not innocent. It shows people who know something, she says, and who know that saying it out loud would cost them. By the end of the session, the image has shifted irrevocably. It is no longer a record of what a family was, but of what they were navigating. And the daughter's hand, still frozen mid-gesture, has beg asterisk N to look less like a signal of fear than of timing. As if the photograph were taken not after something happened, but just before it could no longer be stopped. The photograph does not give up its second meaning willingly. It resists casual scrutiny, as if designed to survive only those who know how to ask the right questions. Miles returns to the original source material, not the print, but the glass negative itself, recently recovered from the same North Creek property where the photograph was found. Under raking light, the surface reveals faint abrasion marks along the lower edge, consistent with repeated removal from a sleeve. Someone handled this image often. Not to admire it, but to check it. High-resolution scans expose what the naked eye could not, a subtle doubling around the daughter's hand. Not motion blur, but pressure. Distortion in the emulsion, caused when the negative was etched lightly before. Development. This was not accidental damage. It was interference, someone altering the plate just enough to preserve a shape. Emily recognizes the technique immediately. In the 19th century, glass negatives were sometimes modified by photographers or subjects themselves to reinforce or suppress details. Retouching usually softened flaws. This did the opposite. It sharpened intent. When the hand gesture is isolated and compared against obscure labor documentation, the match becomes undeniable. In 1871, a New York State factory inspector compiled a private appendix to his annual report, never formally published, never circulated beyond reform circles. In it, he recorded improvised warning signs used by underage workers, particularly girls employed illegally under falsified ages. One sketch, annotated hastily in pencil, shows a near-identical configuration of fingers. Beside it, a single phrase, used when speech unsafe, means watched, hurt, or about to be. The implication is devastating. The photograph was taken in 1872. 1 year earlier, several girls employed at a textile mill less than half a mile from the Ward family residence vanished from payrolls without explanation. No death records. No relocation notices. Their names simply stop appearing. Officially, they return to family. Unofficially, no families reported their return. Miles. Cross-references census data, city directories, and mill housing logs. Patterns emerge. Short-term lodgings. Rotating guardianship. Girls listed as helpers, who appear nowhere else in the record. Among them is a familiar surname, Ward. The eldest daughter in the photograph is identified at last, Evelyn Ward. 17 years old at the time the image was taken. Publicly, she is recorded as assisting her mother at home. Privately, payroll fragments list an E. Wood, same age, same address, assigned to loan maintenance under night supervision. Emily notices something else. The photograph's date aligns not with a celebration, but with a closure. Within 3 weeks of the portrait being taken, the mill temporarily shut down following an incident. The incident is never described. Machinery failure is cited. No injuries officially logged. Yet the closure coincides with the disappearance of 2 more underage workers. This is when the image's purpose becomes clear. The photograph was not created to mark a moment already past. It was created at a threshold when danger had become visible, but proof had not yet been erased. Documents could be destroyed, ledgers rewritten, witnesses silenced. But a photograph, once made, could outlast intention. The gesture was never meant to be decoded immediately. It was meant to survive. Evelyn's hand does not plead. It records. And the decision to embed that record within the most respectable visual form available, a family portrait, was not naive. It was strategic. Authority would preserve it. Descendants would protect it. Archivists would catalog it without suspicion. The photograph would be kept precisely because it looked harmless. By the time Miles steps back from the scans, the image has transformed entirely. What once appeared as domestic stillness now reads as containment. The family's stiffness is not performance, it is compliance under pressure. Everyone in the frame understands the risk. Only one chooses to mark it. The hidden layer is not symbolic. It is procedural. This was a message constructed under surveillance, embedded in ritual, and designed to wait. And for one 150 years, it did exactly what it was meant to do. Once the pieces align, reconstruction becomes unavoidable. Not imaginative, not speculative, but procedural. The kind of tragedy that leaves paperwork instead of graves. Evelyn Ward's public life was small by design. At 17, she is listed in church rolls, census summaries, and tax assessments as a domestic helper within her own household. No wage. No contract. No reason to ask questions. But the mill records, those not yet destroyed, tell a parallel story. Under the name E. Wood, she appears on night shift rotation, assigned to secondary looms in a wing supervised by contractors rather than permanent staff. This distinction matters. Contractors answered to profit, not scrutiny. The mill itself was not exceptional. Brick construction. River-fed power. Long rooms filled with belt-driven machinery whose tolerances were narrow and unforgiving. Injuries were common. Documentation was selective and underage. Labor, though illegal, was ubiquitous, concealed through falsified ages, borrowed surnames, and family complicity under threat of eviction. In January of 1872, a mechanical failure occurs in Loom Room C. A belt snaps during peak output. The shutdown should have been immediate. It was not. 2 girls are caught in the machinery before power is cut. One is carried out conscious. The other is not seen again. The incident does not reach inspectors. It is handled internally. Witnesses, girls Evelyn worked beside, are reassigned within days. Some disappear from payrolls entirely. Families receive quiet compensation. Rent forgiveness, grocery credit, threats disguised as charity. Silence follows. Evelyn is present for the aftermath. She helps clean blood from the floor before dawn. She sees the ledger amended. She hears a supervisor say the girl was never officially here. That sentence becomes instruction. By February, Evelyn understands that knowledge itself is liability. She cannot speak at work. She cannot speak at home, not without implicating her father, whose accounting role ties him directly to the mill's financial insulation. Silence is enforced not by chains, but by dependence. The family portrait is scheduled in early March. The timing is deliberate. Studio photographs were rare expenses, justified only by milestones or necessity. This is neither. The portrait is taken weeks after the accident, while records still exist, while names have not yet been fully erased. Evelyn has already begged *N to plan the gesture. She practices holding it still. Long enough. Natural enough. Meaningful only to those who know how to look. She does not tell her family. The day of the photograph, the studio smells of chemicals and dust. The photographer adjusts the frame. Command stillness. The parents comply. The younger children fidget, then settle. Evelyn raises her hand last. She holds it without tremor. The exposure takes seconds. The message is sealed. Within weeks, the mill closes temporarily. Official reason, mechanical recalibration. Unofficial reality, containment. Employment records are burned. Contractors vanish. 2 injured girls are never named publicly. One is rumored to have been sent upstate. The other leaves no trace. Evelyn continues, working until summer. Then she disappears from the mill records as well. No death certificate is filed. No burial recorded. Her name remains only where it cannot be altered, on a photograph preserved because it looks unremarkable. This is how the tragedy completes itself. Not with violence that demands attention, but with systems that absorb damage and continue. Every adult involved survives. Materially, every institution protects itself. Only the image resists. The photograph does not show grief. It shows containment at its breaking point. A family arranged as proof of order. A daughter marking disorder with the only tool she has left. By the time the mill resumes operation under new management, Evelyn Ward is already unrecorded. But she has left something behind that cannot be reassigned, renamed, or destroyed. She has left evidence. Once Evelyn Ward's name surfaces, the photograph stops being an artifact and becomes a node. Everything connected to it begins to vibrate. Miles expands the scope outward, away from the image and into the paper architecture that sustained the town. County court archives yield their first fracture point, a civil filing from late 1872 documenting the abrupt dissolution of the North Creek Textile Company. The language is sanitized: financial restructuring, equipment transfer, temporary cessation. But the margins tell another story. Entire pages are missing. Attachment references point to exhibits that no longer exist. More troubling is the signature trail. The mill's closure order is approved with unusual speed by the local council, bypassing standard review. 3 council members share a common link: private investment accounts managed by a single clerk. That clerk is Silas Ward. The father in the photograph is no passive provider. Payroll summaries, tax receipts, and bond transfers place him at the financial center of the mill's operations. He did not oversee labor. He oversaw insulation, how losses were absorbed, how compensation was disguised, how liability vanished into numbers. Miles is careful not to simplify. Silas Ward was not a mastermind. He was a functionary. But functionaries are how systems breathe. Emily uncovers correspondence between the mill owners and a regional legal consortium specializing in industrial arbitration. The letters are cautious, euphemistic, but consistent. They discuss excess exposure, non-compliant labor units, and reassignment beyond record. One letter, dated weeks before the photograph, requests confirmation that family channels remain aligned. That phrase recontextualizes everything. The family was not merely adjacent to the mill. It was integrated into its silence. Witness testimony emerges next, not direct, but refracted through decades. A deposition from 1898, given during an unrelated labor dispute, references the girl who tried to mark it. The name is redacted. The speaker refuses to elaborate, citing what happened last time. Church records add another layer. Evelyn's communion. Attendance stops abruptly after March 1872. No transfer noted. No burial service. Her name is never crossed out, just left incomplete, as if awaiting a return that never came. Miles and Emily begin to understand the photograph's deeper cruelty. Evelyn's gesture was not only a warning about danger. It was an act of exposure aimed inward. She was not signaling to outsiders alone. She was indicting the structure that required her family's cooperation to function. The realization reframes the parents' expressions. The mother's rigidity reads as enforced compliance. The father's composure reads as containment, of guilt, of fear, of consequence. The younger children are arranged not for balance, but for obedience. This was not a unified front. It was a truce. Further documents confirm the cost of rupture. 6 months after the mill reopens under new Ownership: Silas Ward's financial records show sudden liquidation. The family relocates. North Creek directories list them only briefly thereafter. They do not prosper. They survive. Evelyn does not. No evidence surfaces of formal punishment, imprisonment, or documented death. Instead, there is absence, total, procedural, deliberate. She exits the record the way the other girls did, but with one critical difference. She anticipated it. The photograph becomes her countermeasure. What began as an isolated anomaly now reads as part of a larger pattern, one replicated across industrial towns where labor laws existed only as suggestion, and enforcement depended on silence. The system did not need violence to erase girls like Evelyn. It needed cooperation. Families. Clerks. Respectable images. And when cooperation faltered, it did not retaliate publicly. It removed the variable. By the end of the investigation's fifth phase, the photograph no longer belongs to the Ward family alone. It implicates a town, a council, a legal apparatus designed to metabolize harm without memory. The gesture, once small enough to miss, now expands outward, touching every document, every absence, every carefully maintained lie. Evelyn's hand was not raised in warning. It was raised in record. And the record, at last, is starting to answer back. The final truth does not arrive as revelation. It arrives as alignment. Once every surviving document is laid side by side, the altered payrolls, the council approvals, the erased mill ledgers, the family's sudden relocation, the photograph ceases to be symbolic. It becomes procedural evidence of a system functioning exactly as designed. Evelyn Ward was not targeted because she was defiant. She was eliminated because she was precise. The investigation uncovers a pattern that had remained invisible precisely because it was ordinary. Underage labor violations were not aberrations, they were budgeted assumptions. Injuries were not accidents, they were tolerated losses. Disappearances were not crimes, they were corrections. The system relied on intermediaries, clerks, parents, landlords, who absorbed moral risk in exchange for economic survival. Silas Ward's role clarifies everything. He was not ignorant. He was not powerless. He was the buffer. His job was to translate harm into accounting language, numbers that could be moved, renamed, erased. He did not need to order silence. Silence was implied by the architecture he maintained. Evelyn understood this before anyone else did. Her knowledge was not abstract. It was logistical. She knew where the ledgers were kept. She knew which names were false. She knew that once records disappeared, so would people. Most critically, she knew that testimony without documentation was meaningless. And she knew that any document directly accusing the mill would be destroyed. So she created one that could not be. The photograph indicts not only the mill, but the family structure that enabled it. That is the core truth, and it is why the image was preserved rather than suppressed. No one dared destroy a portrait that implicated them all. To do so would invite questions. To keep it was safer, so long as no one noticed the hand. Evelyn's gesture is therefore not a cry for help. It is a charge. It accuses the viewer of inheriting a world built on managed disappearance. It exposes how easily violence can be laundered through respectability. The photograph also resolves Evelyn's own disappearance. She was not secretly relocated. She was not protected. She was removed at the moment her knowledge became uncontainable. Whether through confinement, forced relocation, or death, the method no longer matters. The system achieved its objective, she stopped existing on paper. But the paper failed to stop her. The image survived because it was misread as harmless. Because archivists cataloged it without suspicion. Because descendants protected it as heritage. Because no one imagined that a teenage girl could embed an accusation inside a ritual of obedience. That miscalculation is the system's only recorded error. By the time Miles completes the reconstruction, there is no ambiguity left. The photograph was not meant to save Evelyn. It was meant to outlast her. She understood she was already expendable. What she refused to surrender was the narrative. The core truth is this: the photograph is not evidence of tragedy. It is evidence of foresight. Evelyn Ward did not expect justice in her lifetime. She expected erasure. And she built a document that would expose that erasure to people who had not yet been born. The gesture waited. And now, at last, it has been understood. The archive does not change because truth is uncovered. It changes only in how it is read. Today, the Ward photograph rests in controlled storage, cataloged with careful language and restrained footnotes. No headline accompanies it. No exhibit banner announces its weight. Institutions prefer ambiguity. It is safer than certainty, quieter than accusation. The image is described as a late 19th century family portrait with anomalous hand positioning. Nothing more. There is no marker for Evelyn Ward. No plaque. No recovered remains. No official acknowledgement that she ever stood inside a factory at night, that her hands learned the weight of machinery, or that her silence was enforced long before it was chosen. The mill is gone. Its bricks were repurposed, its river redirected, its name forgotten. North Creek absorbed the loss the way industrial towns always do, by continuing. Streets were renamed. Records thinned. Descendants inherited houses without asking how they were paid for. Those responsible faced no reckoning. They aged. They relocated. They died with their reputations intact, their roles diluted by time until they became men of their era, a phrase history uses when it is unwilling to look closer. And Evelyn remains undocumented in every place where justice might have required her presence. Only the photograph refuses that erasure. It does not offer comfort. It does not resolve. It does not even explain itself unless pressed. It waits, still doing the work it was designed to do. The hand remains raised. The accusation remains suspended. It never softens with familiarity. If anything, it grows heavier. What unsettles those who study it most is not the cruelty it reveals, but the elegance of the system behind it. Nothing about Evelyn's disappearance required chaos. It required coordination. Cooperation. People doing their jobs well enough that no single act looked criminal. That is what the photograph preserves. It is not a memorial to a girl. It is a record of how easily a life can be removed when everyone benefits from the removal. Evelyn understood something that reformers, inspectors, and later historians often refuse to admit, that documentation is power, but only when it cannot be revised. She created the one record that could not be audited, falsified, or quietly destroyed. And she hid it inside normalcy. The final injustice is that the photograph survives where she does not. That her warning is legible only to those trained to suspect what looks ordinary. That the burden of recognition falls not on those who caused the harm, but on those who come later and choose whether to see it. The image does not ask for sympathy. It does not ask for outrage. It asks one question, silently and without compromise: how many other portraits were never examined this closely? Then it goes quiet again. Waiting.